Lesson 44 of Lessons in the Catholic Faith. So this is the second part of the fourth commandment. Duties of parents toward their children. Bring them up in the discipline and correction of the Lord. Ephesians 6:4. The very first purpose of marriage is the birth and raising of children by giving them a proper character formation. There you go. It's important to understand that principle. Generally, when people fall in love, they're not directly thinking about that and they don't have to, but it's still the first purpose of marriage. That is to bring children into the world and raise them up. Eventually, of course, so they can go to heaven. And the love of the spouses, the mutual support, that is the second purpose of marriage. And it continues to fulfill itself when the parents are no longer able to generate children. In the Novus Ordo, unfortunately, they've reversed these purposes. And if you reverse those purposes too, it makes it easier to justify birth control and abortion. So it's important that we keep that in mind. It is necessary, therefore, to give adults who are about to enter the Catholic Church an instruction which emphasizes their obligation before God to provide for the religious and moral education of their children, especially in our modern age when religion and morality in families is neglected. A. Parents have a grave obligation to provide necessary food, clothing, and shelter for their children. Both parents are obliged to provide for the healthy development of the child's body. A mother fails in her duty by not preparing good, wholesome food for the children, by feeding the family irregularly, by not providing warm clothes and a neat, clean home. And sometimes, well, if the woman is lazy, then many times the food might be provided irregularly, the house will be a mess or not clean, and that's really pathetic vice for a mother and a wife to have, the vice of sloth, laziness. A father sins by not providing the money for a decent home and good food. Men who spend large amounts of their pay on gambling or alcohol or in other ways not connected with the good order of the home commit serious sin because they deprive the family of the necessities of life. Yeah, there have been plenty of fathers who have sinned this way. Parents must face the raising of a family as a Christian obligation that requires much sacrifice. That cannot be overemphasized. Little sacrifices and big sacrifices. That's the price to pay for a good marriage and for a good family. Sacrifice. They must give themselves for their children and thus obtain joy of soul both here and in eternity. B. Parents are obliged to give their children good example. Example is the greatest teacher. That cannot be overemphasized. Sometimes in the lives of the saints, their biographers say that they didn't have to tell their children much. They led them by example. So example is really number one. A father can say, you need to say your prayers. You need to respect your mother. But if he's not praying, if he's disrespecting the wife, are the children going to respect the mother? Are they going to learn how to pray? Most likely not. So examples number one has to come first because the children of all people, especially when they get older, they will point out your inconsistencies. 100%. Um, so it's very important to show a good example, to practice what you preach. Children are the greatest imitators. They will imitate their parents more than they will the priest and sisters of your parish. Parents must keep out of the child's life any example that will be harmful. Lying, bad language, uncharitableness, immodesty, drunkenness must be avoided. They must lead the child to a life of virtue by giving good example in prayer, attendance at Mass, frequent reception of the sacraments, abstinence from meat on Friday, love of our Lord, love of our Blessed Mother, and respect for the Catholic Church, her priests and sisters. C. Parents are obliged to provide a good Catholic home for their children. Keep out of the home modern pagan attitudes and practices, indecent, immoral pictures and calendars, sexy, sensational, or cheap magazines, of course, now movies, books and comic books. Keep out of the home dangerously immoral, perverse, or suggestive radio and television shows, video movies, and music. And please do not buy your young children iPhones, smartphones that have access to the internet without parental supervision. Just talking about that the other day, discussing it at dinner. Like, if your child does need a phone, then get him a phone or her a phone. But why does it have to have access to the internet? Here's a flip phone. Here's my number. Here's 911. If you need it, call me.
Mm.
It's most parents wouldn't think of giving a gun to an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old, but they give them a smartphone with access to anything online, especially pornography. And so many children, unfortunately, are exposed at a very young age to grave immodesty and decency, and it can become an addiction and a habit and can cause grave problems in their mind, in their psyche, and their morality, or other dangers too of getting in contact with people who would use them and abuse them or become predators. I'm not saying that they should never allowed to be used or know how to use a smartphone, but to give them one that is personally their own and to pay for it as a parent so that they have unbridled access to the internet is grave irresponsibility on the part of a parent.
Mhm.
And as much as they might beg you for one, especially if they go to school that everyone else has one, they don't need one. They definitely do not need one.
Yeah, not even to mention the lack of being able to have attention or being dopamine addicted to just stimulating content of any kind, short form. We've learned the iPad kid generation
Oh
is
gosh, yeah.
suffering a lot.
No, it's very harmful. It's society needs to rethink a few things. Some things are very inconsistent. You know, I'm 18 years old. I can be drafted and go to war and be shot and kill other people and see the horrors of life, but I can't walk into my local grocery store and buy a bottle of wine. There's a grave inconsistency there, you know, or you can't buy small drink for any, alcohol, which is a good thing for minors, but on the same level too, there should be warnings on maybe these electronic devices may be addictive, may expose your child to predation online, may expose your child to pornography.
There's a lot of strange things that are so inconsistent too, because an 18-year-old can't go and buy a bottle of wine, but they can go and buy a firearm and potentially take it to school. So there's just a lot of weird ones.
Yeah, that's seems very inconsistent for sure. Um, that really the internet should be treated like alcohol. It's very, very similar. It has
Oh,
when it's
really?
used moderately, it can be a good thing and a necessary thing. Obviously necessary nowadays, but parents need to teach their children as with everything else. I think parents should teach their children to drink responsibly before they turn 18 or 21. Give them a little bit of wine, give them a little bit, help, make them feel the effects of it a little bit without drunkenness, and let them know their limitations as well and the effects of alcohol, at least in a small level, so they don't, oh, on my 21st birthday, I'm gonna go to a bar and get drunk with my friends. That's not wise.
Now that we know its effects, especially, I want to give a little bit of grace to parents who raised kids maybe in the 90s or maybe even the early 2000s because they really didn't understand the internet being a new thing. I suppose it wasn't something they thought, this is like AOL email, and they thought it was, Yahoo, and they didn't really understand the full scope of what it was becoming. Um, but yeah, now that we know its effects, now that we know its scope, it is truly something that we have to be careful with.
Yes, yes, this is true, for sure. A Catholic home is one in which God and religion are of the greatest importance, and not a good career in life, not being most beautiful or most talented, but in which God and religion and getting to heaven are of the greatest importance. Christian decency in word and action should be the ordinary way of life. The child should see the crucifix, pictures of our Blessed Mother and the saints in conspicuous places in the home. Prayer should be the ordinary practice in the home. I'm saddened at times when people say, "Oh, I'm Catholic," and you go into their home and you can scarcely see an image of Our Lady or of our Lord. Maybe there's a little cross, decorational cross somewhere, and maybe the word faith, but hardly anything that makes you think that they value religion very much in their life.
Mhm.
And even if some people might not like it or might be offended, you say, well, Jesus and Mary are my best friends, they're my family. So if you are offended, that's too bad, but I love them more than my mom or my husband. So you have pictures of those people you love in your home. I have pictures of people of the saints of my Savior in my home. No Catholic school can make up for an irreligious, pagan, or careless home. That's why I applaud homeschooling parents who, even sometimes if they have the opportunity to send their children to a Catholic school, choose to do it themselves because they take that obligation very seriously and they realize that it's their duty, number one, not the state's, not the churches, not the priests or the sisters, but their duty, number one, to educate their children. D. Parents are obliged to teach their children to pray. Parents should not only teach their children to pray, but should lead them in prayer. Daily prayers should be said by the whole family together. The parents should bring their children to religious exercises in the parish church. What was that?
I think Matthias is echoing just a little bit.
I had to take my earbuds off. They were dying, so I'm on speaker now, so there might be some background noise. I apologize.
Okay.
Maybe just mute yourself
Yeah, if it becomes loud, I'll mute
unless you
you
want
or
to
you can
speak.
mute yourself.
hmm
The family rosary should be said together. And if the father doesn't have time or is driving, he can also join in on the phone driving. I know that's not ideal, but it's better than not praying with the father. Prayers before and after meals should not be neglected. Parents should see to it that the children say their morning and evening prayers too. We did that as a family growing up together. But the idea is to make your children love prayer so that they'll make it their own, make their prayer life their own. And I think it's a good practice in some families too with the rosary when the children get older is that they lead a decade as well. Have them lead some of the prayers too. Not always that the father's leading or the mother always leading, but the children should learn to take the lead sometimes as well. E. Parents are obliged to see that their children receive the sacraments. Parents must see to it that their children receive God's grace through the sacraments. Newborn babies should be baptized a week or two after birth. Neglect of the baptism of an infant is also a serious sin. So, in normal circumstances, when a priest is available, to wait a month or longer after birth for baptism is a grave sin, is a mortal sin. Be careful in choosing godparents for your children. Godparents must not only be Catholics, but good Catholics, capable of giving your children excellent Catholic example. and in providing for their religious training if you die. Sometimes that can be difficult nowadays to choose good Catholic godparents, especially if you live somewhere like Hawaii. See to it that your child makes his first confession and receives First Holy Communion at the age of 7 when the priest and his teachers feel he is ready. Sometimes they're ready earlier, and sometimes, like if they're autistic, they're not going to be ready at 7. So it depends, but generally, that's the age of 7. And I can definitely, from experience, say that's a good age, or even a little earlier if the child is somewhat precocious. Go with your child to the church for confession frequently, at least monthly, but weekly if possible. Encourage the practice of weekly communion for all the members of your family. When the child is about 11 years of age and when the priest and his teachers feel he is ready, he should receive the sacrament of confirmation from the bishop. Teach the child the necessity of having the priest bring the sacraments to your home when a member of the family is sick for a long time and can't get to church. F. Parents are obliged to provide a religious and moral education for their children. Parents are under a grave obligation to see to the religious and moral education of their children. That's Catholic Church Canon Law number 1113. Both the law of nature and of the law of the Church teach parents their obligation to raise their children in the fear and love of Almighty God. In their younger years, the habits of children are formed by the religious training given by Catholic home and the Catholic school. This training should not be endangered or lost by attendance at a secular high school or college. Education in a secular high school or college very often leads to indifference about religion and the duties of religion, too often to the total loss of the Catholic faith. I've seen that too, sadly. G. Parents are obliged to prepare their children for marriage. Attitudes on marriage are formed in people when they are quite young. Children should learn of the obligations and joys of the Christian home and the Christian marriage from the example of their parents. Parents should teach their children the sacredness of the marriage bond, the purpose of marriage, the impossibility of divorce. Parents should warn their children of the false teachings of the world on marriage, and the unhappiness that comes from following the world instead of following God and the church in these matters. And certain things can help be educational tools too. If you're watching a movie and you see a divorce situation, you can point that out. This is not good. This is bad. See how unhappy the children are. See how the parents are fighting. It becomes a source of education for the children. Very important to teach your children how to make sacrifices, at least little ones, to deny themselves. Make a sacrifice, eat that vegetable. I know it doesn't taste good. Make a sacrifice, share with your brother and sister. Get out of bed, make a sacrifice. So important that children have discipline and that they know how to deny themselves because that's a great preparation for everything in life, but especially marriage when you have to constantly make sacrifices, when you have to compromise what you might want or like in order for peace in the household, for peace between the married partners, and for peace between children and parents. When the child grows older, before and during puberty, the father should teach his son the simple facts of sex, of procreation. The mother should teach the daughter. This teaching should be given in a beautiful and correct manner, always suited to the age and mental development of the child. So it should be a gradual thing to lead up to the full knowledge of how procreation takes place, never shocking the child or embarrassing him by the manner in which it is discussed, but always giving correct information. Otherwise, your children will learn the facts of generation in an incorrect and even sinful manner from their companions. I think before the 60s in some certain places, and before that, like the Victorian era, I think they were much too taboo about the very important facts of life. So some people didn't are go into marriage and they really don't even know. They freak out the first night with their husband, which is totally wrong. But in the modern age, it has gone the other extreme, where children learn about all these things at a very young age when they're not ready for it, and it's very detrimental to their psyche and their whole outlook. It's just like feeding a child. You don't give a suckling steak. Steak is great food. It's good for men, but you don't give it to an infant, nor do you give them honey. You know, you have to give that food which is suitable to the child's age and development. In general, it's not easy for a father to talk about the subject with his sons, and not necessarily that easy for a mother to talk about it with her daughters. But it's their duty, not the priest, not the states, not their friends. And if you are able to keep up a good relationship with your children, with your child, that won't be then so difficult to talk about the facts of generation, of sex and childbirth and all that. And there are resources too to help out parents, traditional Catholic resources. The parents might want to read up in order to psychologically and otherwise prepare for talking to their children about those issues, those topics.
So generally in most schools now, uh, sex education is taught to fourth and fifth graders. So that's what, 9 to 10 year old, 10 to 11 year olds.
Yeah, that's
So that seems
very,
a little early. Yeah.
it's very early.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, too, I think because of growth hormones in the foods, little children nowadays, many children, some children reach puberty very young. And like you hear
Mhm.
10-year-olds or 11-year-old girls getting pregnant. Um, Kind of scary, a little early. Um, but the other thing too is when you talk to young children about these things, what that they're generally not interested in at first, but then they become morbidly interested in, um, then you have younger children messing around with each other when they would not otherwise be interested in doing that. The average, at least among good Catholics, a 10-year-old boy is not going to have any interest in girls in that regard, sexually. Like, they're just not going to have any interest. It
Mhm.
might come later when they're 16 or 18 or even older, but then, through these sexual educations, they awaken the passion, so to speak, before it's their time. And it's very difficult for young people to deal with it. And it really destroys their psyche in that regard, and they can easily become addicted to various forms of impurity.
Another precaution when it comes to not only the internet, but TV shows and movies, because being exposed to certain adult themes early on also makes children kind of think of emulating that behavior.
This is true, so parents, of course, have to be careful what they show their children on screen.
Mhm.
When we were younger, my parents would pre-watch movies that they weren't familiar with to decipher whether or not it was suitable for our viewing.
It's also pretty dangerous depending on who children associate with, because if they don't have friends that, if they go over to their friend's house and their friend like wants to show them some videos or things like that, like that's a common place I hear where people were first introduced to a lot of things that were a
Yes,
little
it's
bit beyond
yep.
their age.
Yeah, yep, it's very true. So parents have to be very selective about whom they associate with, because you can't be watching your children 24/7, especially not when you're at a party and if you have a lot of children and a lot of other children around. But if the other children are generally raised by their parents along the same values that you raised them, then the chances of them getting exposed to such things will be much less.
Hmm.
And parents can find a way of talking about these things more in a general way. I'm like, my mom had used the word nasty a lot. I know that's nasty and, ugly. And we knew it was, if we saw something along those lines, we knew it would be bad and, would turn away. So that's also things that parents, should do as well and teach their children. Like not to touch themselves, all the time unless they're itchy, of course. Um, and to avoid immodesty and impurity. You can talk about it in a general way, and children can get the idea without anything explicit, so that hopefully, if someone's trying to expose them to that, they would realize this is wrong and hopefully walk away. Yeah, so that's another fault of certain parents who might be too embarrassed to talk about these things with their children. If they don't learn it from their parents, they're going to learn from the internet or from their friends or bad sources. So you definitely don't want that to happen. You want to tell them in the right way and speak about the purpose that God gave to the sexual functions and the beauty of it
Hmm.
when it's used according to
The
God's,
purpose of it.
yeah, when it's used according to God's plans. H. Parents are obliged to see that their children associate with good companions. As far as possible, children should be encouraged to choose their companions from among other good Catholic families. Constant association with children of non-Catholic families partially destroys the good influence of the Catholic home and the Catholic school. Easygoing religious attitudes and false ideas on life can readily be gained from non-Catholic children. I. Parents are obliged to see that their children have decent recreation. Wholesome outdoor recreation and good companions should always be encouraged. Many forms of recreation are dangerous to children today. Many movies and videos, internet, a great number of radio, television, and music programs. But Catholic books, radio, television, and video should be encouraged at home. That's another extreme some traditionalists might go into is not having their children do enough recreation outside or never taking them out to town to go shopping or anything because they might see something indecent. That's another extreme that should be avoided as well because you have to slowly expose your children to things and teach them how to deal with it. You can't protect them forever.
Hmm.
What I don't like in general is organized sports many times for homeschooling if it's, if they're associating with other families who don't have the same values that they do, especially if the organized sports take place on Sunday. Um, I'm not in favor of that at all for many reasons. And my dad was correct in that when he tried to warn my uncle about the participation of my cousins in those events, those sports events. Um, it led them down a not a good path. You know, it made soccer more important than keeping the Lord's Day holy. It exposed them to a lot of bad companions. Um, yeah,
Um,
it took a toll on the family for sure.
yeah, and I know you spelt that out clearly. I don't remember if Dad specifically mentioned those two main reasons why he was negative on that kind of organized sports. Um, Reason being it on a Sunday, other reason being, pagan influence. Um, but yeah, he,
And then I think especially for girls too, they're wearing shorts or a modest dress. Um, and I don't think soccer's kind of a rough sport. I don't think it's a very suitable sport for a woman, in my opinion. Um, Problem is too, it was overemphasized.
However, go ahead.
It was overemphasized there that they be very good in these games, whereas sports, in my opinion, shouldn't be an end in themselves unless you're a professional player. Sports are meant for health, wholesome recreation, for exercise, for learning how to do teamwork, for learning how to be a gracious winner, for learning how to be a gracious loser. um, toughening up people, because there's some physicality to it as well.
Um, yeah.
When
Go.
sports
Yeah.
become number one, there's something, in my opinion, off with your parenting if you're constantly, pushing, because I think it's meant sport. A lot of sport is a game, really. The game shouldn't be number one. It's a purpose of recreation. Um, Maybe hopefully making friends, getting stronger, getting fresh air, that type of thing. But when it becomes an end in itself, I think that's problematic, especially for children. If you're going to make a career out of it, if you're really good at it, okay, fine. Then if you want to be a professional, that's a different story. But for most people, that's not going to be what's going to put bread on the table.
Hmm.
Getting
Yeah,
together
maybe
with
it's
your
some people's
cousins and your friend.
calling.
What was that?
Maybe it's some people's calling in rare cases.
Yeah, some people are very good at it and make millions of dollars. Um,
I just want to say, like, if this is going on YouTube, so that's fine if we talk about things like our cousins and stuff.
Yeah, just as long as you don't name anybody, that's perfectly fine.
Sorry. Um,
I thought about that too. Well,
we we do have the same last names and whatnot, but other thing, since I'll let you figure that out. I don't really care. Um, other thing is you mentioned an ideal, which ideally you are against like sports if you're taking it if you're unless you're taking it to a specific, like you said, Olympics or something. I'm not sure what you said, but I like that it's good for team,
mhm.
how to be a good winner, how to be a good loser, and team building as well as physicality, mostly healthy benefits. Um, but generally,
My
you
point is if a child is pushed too much just for performance sake, you have
right.
to be a super good player. Um, I think that can be very detrimental.
I agree. I
That's
also
not
just
number
want
one
to
purpose
comment
of
on,
sport is to win and be good at it. That's not its number one purpose.
Yeah.
You should be good at your job. You should be a good nurse, a good priest, a good mother, and that's very important. To have to be good at sports, like where's the necessity? It's literally a game. Why do I have to be super good at a game? You don't. It's a game. That's the
Um,
thing.
mhm.
yeah, but also to take that.
Any game is a game unless you're doing it for your living. You don't have to be super good at it. That's not number one purpose. If the parent makes it the number one purpose, it's perverting it.
Unless they are trying to take it to the next level and
Yeah, I mean
as a
if
career. But in
if
that
your
case, like
yeah, if your scholarship depends on it and if you want to
yeah,
go to the NBA or NFL, whatever, and be a professional, you're playing, college basketball, sure. But still in itself it's still a game.
yeah, the scholarship's kind
There
of the
may
big
be some
one.
cases.
Hmm.
There may be some cases where parents can see that their children have received God-given talent. Like,
Yes.
wow, my kid excels at this. Like, this might be something they're meant to do. And maybe they aren't meant to do it for their entire lives, but God-given talent, when it presents itself, you do want to nurture it within healthy bounds.
Yeah,
Yes. Hmm.
God-given talent such
Um,
as steroids.
but
Not that they shouldn't try to be
I
good
just,
at whatever they
no.
do, whether it be fencing, airsoft or, soccer, whatever they do, they should try to be good at it just because that's part of the game too. Um, but if it's overemphasized, I believe that's problematic.
I really, really want to comment though, because I used to not think anything bad of soccer, but there's been a lot of research that's come out recently that shows it's, I think, the number two leading source of childhood concussions, number one being American football, and then soccer, because it is a contact sport and you do use your head in the game and you can get kicked, you can hit the ball with your head, all these things. Um, Childhood concussions, aside from being potentially life-threatening, actually lead to a certain kind of brain damage that often will disrupt people's decision-making part of the brain, where they can become more aggressive and impulsive adults later in life. And so it's also just important to understand the risks of certain sports. So I'm probably not going to be inclined to want to encourage my children to do those kinds of contact sports Um, like baseball might be safer, fencing. There's so many options, but
I think that's a
soccer
good
actually
point.
leads
Yeah,
to
I've
a lot of damage.
okay, maybe in Europe, but I heard soccer is the number one most violent sport. Maybe not in this country. Maybe NFL probably takes the cake with that one, but I think in Europe, especially, people get quite passionate about it. Yeah, it's not a gentle sport, that's for sure. It's you might think airsoft is harmful, but nah, you get a little welts or something. No permanent damage. Yeah, I think you're right.
Well, we wear a lot more safety gear as well for doing it properly.
That's true.
Oh,
And then
funny
also
enough,
there's a lot of
yeah.
1v1 sports where you still have a team that you work with. So even martial arts, because if you teach martial arts properly, you understand how to limit yourself. You understand like how much strength to use.
Right. Whereas you kick a ball as hard as you can, you never know what's going to fly and what's going to go in the path of that ball, whether it be someone's head or
Right.
teeth or whatever.
We
Any-
actually played Ultimate Frisbee at my birthday. Us and a bunch of friends went to a big grassy park, and I wouldn't think that that was very violent, but something should we mention it or should we? I don't know. I don't know if I should have brought that up.
That's fine.
That's
The
okay.
chaos of
We're
having
going.
lots of players running around. Yeah,
Right.
things can go wrong.
Speak.
Yeah,
Funny
it's up to
enough,
parents. Parents need to decide the risk factor, whether it's, worth it on the sport as well. Some parents might think their children are a little too aggressive, so maybe the martial art type sports might not be good for them, or, it's again, sometimes some of that's parental discretion, of course.
A
funny
good
enough,
martial arts teacher would teach
basketball
children restraint.
That's true.
basketball has the highest. Is rated to have the highest amount of injuries, not concussions, but injuries for some reason.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, a lot of knee injuries, I bet.
I think it's because they're not protected and you don't expect it.
Yeah.
But you're also encouraged to do like really high jumping. And if you don't land on those properly, like ankle, knee injuries for sure.
But anyways,
Yeah. Um, yeah, like, again, it's some of that's up to the parents. I just, as a priest, Catholic priest, I discourage parents from doing certain type of organized sports, especially if it takes place on Sunday.
Mhm.
If you can't,
I'm just more concerned about brain injuries because that can affect who they become, like
you know,
aggression wise, having the faculty to make good decisions, that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah, that's more important than than having a good knee or a good ankle. That's very true.
Mhm.
All right, we're almost done with the lesson here. Jay, parents are obliged to see that their children respect and obey the civil authorities. And that's part of the fourth commandment too. Honor your father and your mother, but also honor all legitimate authority. And teach your children to respect and obey the civil authorities, to respect the policeman. Avoid carping criticism of civil officials before the children. Teach them to respect the laws of our country. Teach them to respect for the authority of all civil officials. Differences of political opinion should be kept to a minimum around the younger children. However, be sure to raise them in a proper understanding of correct political ideals, putting them in perspective with the teachings of the Catholic Church. And a good Catholic curriculum would help with that too. K. Helping the child to be a priest, religious brother, or sister. To have a priest, brother, or sister in the family is considered one of the greatest honors among Catholics. If one of your children seems to show a desire to enter the religious life in the Catholic Church, encourage him and direct him according to the advice given you by your parish priest. To dissuade a child from such a holy and happy life is wrong on the part of the parent. All right, questions for review of this lesson. What are the duties of parents toward their children?
Oh, well, that's pretty much everything we've talked about, but I'm kind of visualizing it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have food and the means to sustain a living body, and then you have a home and security, a roof above your head, and then you have the ability to cultivate, you know, education and learning and so forth to become the realization of a good person.
Right. Why should parents provide their children a good Catholic home to live in?
Um, I guess like how you plant a seed and water and nurture and grow it into, the beautiful plant it will become. A good Catholic home would provide prayer and good example and just having good Catholic standards for ourselves and showing that to our children will allow them to grow into good Catholic people too.
Correct. How important is it to teach children to pray?
Incredibly important. I mean,
Yes.
start good habits early.
Yeah, as an adult, if we don't pray, we don't go to heaven. So not just how to pray, but to make them to help them love prayer and to make, especially when they grow older, at the time of their emancipation, that hopefully if you've done a good job as a parent, they will have their own prayer life. They will make prayer their own, not just something they did with their mom and daddy, but now I'm an adult and this is what I also want to do and I like doing it and I need it.
hmm
What influence should a parent have? What influence should a parent have on their children's vocation?
Um, so I'm seeing vocations and I'm thinking this is a scope that include like advising them for marriage, making sure that they participate in good activities, just giving them general like good advice throughout their life.
Yes. And not to discourage them or to try to stop them if they have a religious vocation.
Oh yeah, if they have a calling to pursue, religion to be a nun or a priest or, someone in the church,
Hmm.
then absolutely encourage it, but not force them to because it's wrong to force kids to become
That's
priests or
correct. Yeah,
nuns.
that's another extreme that some parents have fallen into to force them into a vocation, usually for their own selfish means, or sometimes in third world countries too, you can up your status by becoming a priest or a nun. Or if you think about in the olden days too, if you became a
Sure.
nun and became an abbess, you were quite powerful. You had a lot of power as a woman in the Middle Ages as an abbess and a certain amount of independence too. So some worldly parents might encourage you on like a career in that regard instead of focusing on did God call you to this? Is this better for saving your soul?
I've
So
never heard of the term abbess.
so it'd be like if it's a female term instead of an abbot. An abbot's like the head of a certain monastery and a larger monastery, an abbey. So an abbess is the female equivalent. And you'll see some pictures of
Oh,
certain saints, like Saint Gertrude the Great. She was a Benedictine abbess, and she will have in her hand a crozier. It's a staff, a golden staff with like a curved on it. It's a symbol of authority. Bishops have that because they're pastors of souls, and that symbolizes the shepherd's staff with the crook to grab the sheep, if they're falling off a cliff, or, as a staff to ward off the wolves. So certain female abbess, especially saints, that would be the more famous ones. They're also pictured with a crozier.
oh,
Like Hildegard von Bingen, she's very famous even outside of Catholic circles. German, I believe she was an abbess too, and a saint. She was a very interesting woman, very influential too in the world of natural medicine. She knew a lot, and I think she was also given revelations by God about the powers of certain herbs and plants and health things, as well as getting revelations from God about spiritual things. Yeah,
hmm.
Hildegard von Bingen, Saint Hildegard von Bingen. Okay,
Where's
well,
Bing? What place is that Bingen?
it's in Germany. I can't say exactly where that is. I think more middle or northern Germany. Okay, we'll end this lesson with an anecdote. A just retribution. A certain father who led a sinful and scandalous life had a son who followed his father's bad example. The father was drunken and degraded. The son was willful, passionate, and rebellious. One day, when the father reproached his son for his undutiful conduct, the son seized his father by the hair of his head and threw him to the ground. From there, he dragged him to the door of the house. There, the father raised his voice and said, "Stop, wretched son. When I was your age, I never dragged my father farther than this." In the words of the father, he acknowledged the truth of the adage, like father, like son. The justice of God allowed the son to treat his father just as that man had treated his father.
Mm.
But it happens too, and thank God that there are people who break the bad trend. Most of the time, unfortunately, we follow in the footsteps of, well, unfortunately or fortunately, depending if your parents are good or bad, we follow in their footsteps. But there are some who, thanks to the grace of God, acknowledge that their parents have not walked in a righteous path, and they, with the grace of God, choose to break from that mold and to stop the cycle of sin and to become a better person than their drunken father or adulterous father. So that's always our choice as well, our free will. With the grace of God, we can do that.